Welcome to today's edition of the podcast version of Patio Ponderings. Today we have a good friend of mine, Mr. Dave Voors, who hails from Monroeville, Indiana. Dave is an ag banker and farmer in Northeast Indiana, and he is here to share with us some insights into his life and role in ag banking. We'll also talk about how he and I both are second shift farmers. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me here today.
You're welcome. Before we jump into the hot topics of the day, of the ag banking and the WASD report, can you kind of give us an idea of your life story and what brought you back to Woodburn after college and what you've done since then?
Sure. Always had an interest in farming. My grandparents were dairy and grain farmers in the Monroeville area. My wife and I actually live on some of their property now. So as a small child, helping Grandpa milk cows, being involved was the highlight of my day or my week to be involved in agriculture. So I always wanted to be involved and looked for ways to come back to the farm. It was a smaller operation that didn't allow for me to just step in and farm. I kind of had to find a niche and work my way into it. So that's what led me to Purdue University to pursue a degree in agriculture and then use that knowledge to keep me in the industry and also give me some flexibility to farm.
And that was mid-'80s, so we were still feeling the effects of the farm crisis, right?
Correct. As a child and even into middle school, I remember going to a lot of farm sales with Grandpa, equipment auctions. And at that time, farm real estate was listed by realtors and for sale for weeks or months at a time. There was not a demand to have the auctions and have the things that you see happening today. It was, as I look back, it was a very, very tough time.
Fortunately, you and I were young enough, we didn't understand completely how bad it was.
Correct. In my grandparents' situation, he had also worked off farm, so it was kind of like, for me, it's a hobby or something enjoyable to do. So it didn't have as big of impact on them as if they were trying to farm full time. So I would say insulated from it. And
you were not the only person throughout the Midwest in the early to mid 80s that heard, you ain't coming back to this, I'm sure.
Yes. And even while I was at Purdue, that was a topic of some of the ag econ classes, is making sure that it works financially for you to fit into the family's operation, to have a plan, and sometimes bringing the children back to the farm at the wrong time can have a detrimental effect to the whole operation. It can't support everybody.
So you graduated from Purdue with ag economics degree?
Correct.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time in Krannert.
Yes.
Yeah. A well-known place for a lot of ag students at Purdue. And you came back to the Allen County area, worked at East Allen County Equipment, right?
Yes, sold John Deere equipment, new and used equipment in Woodburn for about 5 years.
And that time, two things that stuck out in my memory of your time there was the release of the 7,000 series tractors, right?
Correct.
And probably more importantly, the 750 drill.
Yes.
That was a game changer for you, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was unbelievable the distance people would travel because, at that time, just like it is now, equipment's rationed or proportioned to dealerships based on prior sales. And so in Woodburn, they were pretty early to adapt the no-till farming. And so we would get drills when other parts of the Midwest wouldn't. And, we'd have people from Lansing, Michigan, Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis coming up to Woodburn to buy a 15-foot drill.
15-foot drill. And so what would a standard 750 drill with 7.5-inch spacing sell for?
Initially, they were under $20,000.
Okay. And if you found a good used one with good bearings and upgraded closing system, you're between that 10 and 20, right? Right now?
Yeah. I would say that a good one will bring pretty close to what it retailed for.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So you got the 750 drill and the 4020 that are in the same boat.
Yes. It's one of those pieces of equipment that you look back that Deere definitely got right, whether it's 4020, the 7,000 series corn planter, 7,000 and 8,000 series tractors. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those that they hit a home run with.
The rest they copied.
I didn't say that.
So then you moved on to some materials handling sales with forklifts and other industrial equipment?
Yes.
Okay.
Did that for about 7 years. My career path has always been I enjoy sales. Mm-hmm. And so part of that, going to that was a little more 9 to 5 hours and no Saturday. So it kind of fit into what my farming situation was doing as it was starting to grow. It was able to give me a little more time off to help around the farm.
Well, you also had some family obligations at the same time, right?
Yeah, I need to pay attention to those too.
Yeah, and your girls were into sports at the same time too.
Correct. Both were volleyball and basketball players, and my wife and I always made sure that their activities came first. That we were always there to watch, cheer them on, support them when they lost. So it was a little bit of a juggling act.
So how did you make the jump from a pure sales role, kind of 9 to 5 when you were working with industrial equipment, to ag banking?
Ag banking was actually what I wanted to do when I got out of college. But at that time, in the state of Indiana, the banking industry had deregulated. And so larger banks were coming in and buying up the smaller community banks. The larger banks then, as well as today, didn't have a lot of interest or knowledge in the ag lending field. So ag lending departments were closing down, and we had just come out of the 80s. So it had been a tough market for financial institutions. So had the opportunity. I was actually recommended by a friend to the bank that I work for today.
Okay. And then you left and did some equipment sales for a little bit, but you came back to ag banking.
Yes, yeah. Machinery is still a passion, and it was an opportunity to get back into that market, but I really missed the banking and the more in-depth interaction with the farmers. The equipment's a little more transactional, banking relationship much deeper.
So one of the things that I've talked about with other guests, and I've hit on in my patio ponderings at writings, is that the sales process in agriculture is so relationship-based. There's slight differences between chemical and seed and equipment and banking. It appears to me that the banking is probably more relationship-oriented than any other part of ag sales. Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%.
And it's one where you really have to trust each other.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that, early on as I'm starting a new relationship with a customer, one of the things I talk about is really the two things we have to offer each other are trust and communication. If either side of the equation doesn't honor that or do that, the relationship's not going to work.
It's not adversarial like a lot of the sales are. I think about if we go and buy a car, that's not a relationship. That's more of a fight.
None of us enjoy doing it, and you've got your guard up instantly.
And you don't feel like he's going to give you the best interest, even though he goes to the manager and says he's got the best deal for you.
Yeah, because how many times what will it take you to drive it home tonight? That's not how the banking industry works.
I think back to some of the conversations I had with my banker that you helped me get work with, talking about how we can plan things and how we can put things together, how we can talk to the loan committee, and how you don't do that just by saying, what do you got for me?
Correct. It takes a lot of conversation. It's about getting to know them as an individual, know their operation, what are their goals, what are their plans, getting them to admit what the strengths and the weaknesses are of their operation. And you have to really tailor a loan package to maximize the strengths and help shore up those kinds of weaknesses. So it's very in-depth, and sometimes would say uncomfortable as you're talking about transition planning or what's going to happen to the operation when you pass, things that a lot of farmers don't think about, and it's really something that should be more on the front of their mind. How is this going to go on if something happens to me? Or if you've got a spouse that's working off farm or involved in the operation, how do you deal with that? What's going to happen?
We in ag are reticent to talk about succession planning and end-of-life decisions, but at the same time, I think we talk about them more than anybody else. What does that tell you about non-ag world?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would say on the ag side, some of it is they talk about it, but implementing it becomes the stumbling block that they don't want to take that step. Or the biggest thing that I hear a lot of times is, well, that's not fair to the non-farm kids. Sometimes I've heard this over and over again. Fair isn't always equal. That if you have a child that stayed behind to help keep the farm going, should they be treated differently? And that's each individual's decision. But sometimes that being more focused on equal can actually cause generations to pull away from the farm or to say that, okay, I'm done, or there's no future when mom and dad are gone.
Or where those siblings won't talk to each other anymore because equal was not fair.
Yes.
I'm sure you've seen that in your years, and we've all heard about them anecdotally.
Yeah, or even not having a good plan in place, and somebody that wants to keep the farm continuing after the death, having to borrow quite a bit of money just to keep it going, and whether it's to pay off debt, some tax liability, those types of things. There's a lot of things that with a little bit of planning could stave that off or keep your operation going forward.
I did take Dr. DeBoer's estate planning class, his 3-credit ag econ class. It was a 400 level. I did okay until I had to start judging livestock, but there's bits and pieces I still bring up today. And I had a conversation with my wife just this morning, who is not exposed to it, and she had questions about, well, what happens when we die, and is a trust in place, and we have this, like, no, this doesn't make sense because of this, and she's ignorant of it because she hasn't been exposed to it. So I think you hit on something that is a huge challenge for our industry as we continue to hear that farmers get older and we need to talk about transition plans.
Yes, and my advice is talk to your accountant, talk to an attorney, get experts involved, but have in mind, both you and your spouse, where do you want this to go after you're gone? What do you want your legacy to be? Is it that, I don't have anybody interested, or, I just want, to be financially taken care of and pass it on to the children? Do you have someone that's interested in coming up and taking it over, working on that? Is there somebody, if you want the farm to continue, is there somebody that's maybe non-family that you make some arrangements so that they at least have the opportunity? But I would say the biggest thing is know what you want, and then once you have that figured out and in place, communicate it with the heirs so there are no surprises.
That's probably the biggest take home of it.
Mm-hmm.
My brother-in-law works for a mortgage brokerage. And when he and I sit down at Christmas or when we get together over a bourbon, the discussions that I have with him about the loans that he makes are pretty black and white. Credit score of this, assets of this, want to buy a house of this. Decision could be made by an equation. And you and I could take a little bit of our basic knowledge from high school and do an if-then program, pretty simple, and say, yes, we can loan to you. That's not the case with the farm.
No.
Because if-then can turn into another if-then to another if-then to another if-then, and pretty soon you go from X and you start the alphabet over 2 or 3 times.
Yes. Yeah. And then you kind of run into, with cash accounting, fair market value balance sheets, understanding those numbers, and that, the tax return may look horrible in 2024, but I carried over all of my crop into 2025, or there's a high depreciation number. So it's important that you have a banker and a bank that understands those nuances, those variances, where the mortgage situation it is debt to income ratio, a tax return, a W-2, and a pay stub. It's much more concrete, and this is more of an art than a science.
Even though we're taught at Purdue that it's all science, because you got debt to asset ratio, you have cash flow ratio, and all this stuff that we're taught that we use, they're kind of guidelines for you, right?
Guidelines, in Purdue we'll talk about doing your books accrual adjusted, doing an accrual adjustment to really tell you the true financial health of your operation. Mm-hmm. There's some reluctance in the banking industry. Who's going to do that work? Is it going to be the loan officer, RM? Is it the credit department? So kind of the industry standard is just been that fair market value balance sheet on 12/31 of each year.
Okay.
And kind of pairing that with the tax returns and a cash flow projection to kind of help all understand that. That's one of the reasons is if you're new to a bank, they want 3 years worth of tax returns, 3 years worth of balance sheets. By doing that, we can look at and kind of in our mind make some of those accrual adjustments or kind of know the health of the operation.
Okay. Well, that brings around the first topic that I wanted to chat on, and it plays into the nuanced approach to ag accounting and ag banking. Is that what were the bottom lines or the attitudes when you went to the Purdue Ag Bankers Conference last month?
Fairly subdued based on prices, kind of where things are at. There's, I guess, 2 parts to that. optimism based on the election results. Purdue shared their survey. It was kind of gauges farmer optimism. They surveyed, I believe, 400 farmers monthly, and could kind of chart where farmers' attitudes were going through the summer, kind of declining, what you're feeling towards the ag industry, investing in the industry, that kind of thing. Saw it declining, and then actually saw towards the latter part of October an uptick in mood and sentiment, and then it really jumped in early November after the election.
So is that the ag barometer that Dr. Minert runs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Couldn't think of the name of it. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. So
that's why we're kind of a team here, Dave.
Thanks for covering. So the Purdue, they talked about some of that upswing was, they felt like some of the regulatory things that were being proposed to agriculture would get maybe relaxed or slowed down a little bit. A little bit of concern about what's going to happen in trade war and tariffs, but overall the farmers felt that this was going to be better for the ag industry long term with the direction that things were going.
Okay, and that sentiment has kind of stayed positive.
Yes.
And I think it was one that was just released was the highest positive attitude in 12 months or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can see that. And part of it's just a change of administration, regardless of your political views. The other one is change of administration.
Well, and as a whole, farmers want to manage their own operation. They don't want to be told what practices, how to, you must if you want to benefit in this. And we're kind of an independent group, and it's, nobody likes having Big Brother look over their shoulder.
Big Brother's going to pat us on the shoulder in the next 90 days.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure that there will be some customers that will forget to mention that. Oh, no. I didn't get as much as you thought I did. So what was the attitude of the bankers that you talked to when you went to the conference?
We're as a group concerned going into this year. 2024 eroded a lot of that working capital. We've had some really good years where balance sheets improved, working capital was getting stronger, debt service coverage strong. 24 ate a lot of that cushion away.
Okay.
And margins are going to be tight. From that meeting, kind of expect the pricing to kind of be in the range that we saw in 2024 through 2026. So they didn't see an uptick at that time to help some of this out. Overall balance sheet health is good. Farmers have paid down quite a bit of debt, but this is different than the 80s where everything was balance sheet lending. This is very much cash flow driven.
Okay.
Cash flow is much tighter now.
Was there any discussion about the passing of the financial stimulus? That was before that passed, right?
That was before that passed, yes. Okay. Yes.
I listened to quite a few people about that, and I think there's enthusiasm, but the enthusiasm seems to be more on the supply side, that it'll go straight through and either pay off bills, pay down some debt, or go straight to the local dealer.
I would say it's going to be probably pay suppliers, pay down debt. I have some friends in the equipment industry still not seeing that. Sometimes you get kind of an uptick in January, crops I've sold, I've got money in my pocket, I'm shopping, looking for things. Still a little cool and a little soft in that area right now. And some of it is, bankers are kind of watching a little more closely about your purchases and transactions. So that, I guess, back to earlier when you're talking about a relationship with the banker, I want a phone call from my customer to say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and we'll talk through it. Did you pick up more acres? Do you need a bigger planter? Were you down a lot during harvest with that combine and the repair bills are starting to eat me up? I want to talk through that because I'm not always going to say, no, you can't trade. There may be a reason. So I think bankers are, putting a little tighter grip on spending.
Okay.
Is it necessary? We're not saying no to everything, but is it necessary? If it's just to avoid paying a little bit of a tax, income taxes, you're just deferring that. You're not really avoiding it. You're deferring it.
You're moving the nutshells around on the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that I've noticed, and you and I have talked about this, dealership inventories are huge compared to where they were 2, 3, 4 years ago, right?
Yes. Yes.
So there might be some incentives down the road, do some wheeling and dealing, but yeah, that's outside the purview of the Purdue Banker Conference.
Yes, but it's something that they touched on, that they thought there was a little more optimism for some equipment purchases in 2025. Dealer inventory is very, very high right now.
I notice it as I travel around. I think about it going to Huntington and Red Line's right there at 9 and 24, and you've got a quarter mile that you just get to look at it going at 60 because that's the speed limit. And 2020, 21, like there was nothing. It was a huge parking lot. And now, like, oh, there's a few more. And down here at Woodburn, that south side of the parking lot is full of green paint. So
I just came past there, and there's a lot of equipment on the lot.
Yeah. Well, those are discussions that I'm sure you'll have. One thing that I've heard over the past couple of years when we were talking about the challenge of ag banking and debt problems, and when we're talking about the 80s farm crisis, you think back to Jessica Lang out there with that K2 giving her husband lunch. The debt load that farm had in 1979, 1980 could be serviced if he chose to go to an off-farm job full-time. Like stop, go work at Harvester, GM. You could roll that into some sort of mortgage and pay for it. We're working with substantially different numbers now that if Farmer Jones doing 2,000 acres went belly up, the bank's in a different position that he's not going to be able to just go to town and service a $500,000 loan that he might be stuck with. Is that right?
Yes. That's one of the things that keeps us up at night as bankers is how does, if the worst thing happens, how does this unwind? Because the last thing that we want to do is come in and say, Jim, you're going to have to sell that 80 or that 120 to satisfy this debt, or even to get it down to a level that you can service it while you're working in town. That's the last thing we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, everything, land price is still strong, but, machinery values for what you thought your tractors and combines were worth a year ago or 2 years ago, it's probably 20 to 25% less right now. The market's soft.
Well, I know what we paid for our combine last year, and I've seen a comparable combine sitting on classifieds for less than I paid for mine. So yes, I would agree with that we've got some softness in the market that's taking the shine off that apple.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, we can go to Machinery Pete or Tractor Zoom and we can find things that buck the trend. But overall, I think you're right that machinery values have come down just because we're not flush with the cash we were to keep those prices up.
Correct. And the other thing is you're starting to see dealerships send large quantities to these auctions. So if you look at a Big Iron List or some of these other auction groups, there's multiple sales every week of things just getting dumped on the market. You're still going to see the retired farmer that always took good care of his equipment. I want to buy my neighbor's tractor or my combines to know how I took care of it. You're still going to have those peaks, like you mentioned, that Machinery Pete features and talks about. But you really look at the auction market and start logging into and looking at some of those sites, what things are selling for. It's a pretty dramatic drop on late model equipment.
If you're the buyer in the market for something, you can watch. And there was a 16-row white planter that was on Plevna's lot for $29,000. It went to McKillop's sale for $19,000. Then it was on Schrader's sale for $19,000, and it just sold at another auction for $11,000. And I think that $11,000 was a real one because they're finally saying it's got to go.
Mm-hmm.
Little tidbit, sidebar. I'm sure you do this too. That go search on Tractor House. Look at the pictures.
Yes,
that's the same picture.
Yes,
or that's the same planter because it's got the same mark here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'm seeing it that there's some of this jockeying that was going on 18, 19 on stuff where it was going from auction to auction to auction. I think about Peffley's last auction. There was stuff there that ended up going up to Polk's. We were fighting that decline in equipment price, and even the jockeys were trying to recover some value, and it wasn't there.
Yeah, and some of those pieces do just get passed from sale to sale. There may be a reserve on that, and after it goes to 2 or 3 sales and it's not hitting its reserve, then it's finally, this is really what the market's going to bear. So some of those you're seeing are maybe a little bit inflated. They're not letting them go. I would be curious are they true sales?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 19 here, 19 here. I mean, that thing didn't sell.
Correct.
It was paper.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, as with most of my conversations with you and my podcast, they go places we don't expect them to.
Yes, that's all right.
So one of the other things that sets us apart is that you and I are not full-time farmers. I took a discussion we had the other day and put it on one of my patio ponderings and said we're not perceived as real farmers. Huh? We've heard that for quite a while, right?
I was told that at Purdue University at one time.
Oh, yeah. Was it Dr. Kedlick that told you that?
Yep.
It's still a sore spot.
35 years later.
35 years later, Dave Voors is as red as a beet right now.
And that's not to say my dream, I would love to farm full time. It didn't present itself when I got out of college. And as time went on, I started to realize doing this, whether you want to call it a hobby, part-time, however you want to define what I do, and having a job in town gave my family a lot more financial security that, allowed us to do things and take a lot of pressure off mentally from the financial standpoint, that knowing that we had a paycheck coming all the time, that, could expand and do things, and I didn't have to have a great crop to pay the light bill.
The positive for both you and me, we get to see behind the velvet curtain in the Emerald City to see what's really going on. And in your role as a banker, when you sit down with your farmer, regardless of 5,000 acres, and he talks about chemical prices, you can go, yeah, I paid $22 for Roundup this year instead of 12 like it was 5 years ago. I mean, you can relate a little bit differently than somebody that doesn't have skin in the game. Do you think that's a strength for you?
Definitely. I understand the challenges they're going through. So as we're sitting down this year during renewal season, I know that your working capital's tighter. You got by this year, and as we start projecting and looking forward, this year's going to be tough too. So I'm empathetic to that. I'm aware of it. It's something that I can also explain internally, or I'll even get questions, through the credit process. Is this what you're seeing with your operation, Dave? Yes, definitely. I'm seeing that. So I think it helps me understand, be a better resource or advisor for my clients.
And I think being a resource, you can also raise the bullshit flag on some things that maybe their suppliers might be telling them. Like, hey, I think this would be a great year to do X. And you're like, we're going to project $4 corn. I don't think you need to be doing that, right?
Exactly. Because that's, whether it's my operation or someone else's, is okay, I'll support that. But what's that return going to be? If I'm going to spend $40 an acre for some new product, I better be getting $45 to $50 an acre more revenue.
Well, if you believe what we were told at Purdue, it should have been 120.
Let's not go down that path. There's got to be a reasonable rate of return for that.
Making another pass across the field because you want to doesn't hack it anymore.
Right, or to go to the coffee shop and brag about my yield. We really need to focus on what's my net return per acre.
One of the things that I struggle with is relating everything to bushels per acre. Because number one, bushel is a volumetric. I mean, maybe the Europeans have it when they talk about kilos per hectare. Maybe we should go there. But we chase yield so many times. Sometimes chasing yield isn't most profitable, right?
Correct. That's one of the things in my operation with my agronomist. When I switched to agronomists a few years ago, we talked about it. One of the questions he asked, what do you want? And the banker side in me came out and says, I want to be I want to make the most profit per acre. So are there times there's things I could put on my fields and do to raise my yield? Sure. But the next question is, what kind of, bushel increase are we going to get out of that to justify that expense? And so my agronomist, that's our conversations. I'm looking at this new plan or looking at changing something. what's it going to return? He's already working on that answer for me as he's asking the question. So especially in these tougher times or leaner times like this, I really think farm operators need to focus on that.
More yield, you get to spread your fixed costs over more bushels, it reduces your costs. So it all gets back to yield somehow.
Somehow, but I guess it's the same way as a banker. Sometimes I get, the question, well, if you'll just loan me some more money, I'll farm my way out of this.
Yes. I'm losing at 50 cents a piece, so I need to raise 5,000 more.
Yeah. So that's where I understand trying to, perform and have good yields, but it's got to be done reasonably and sensibly.
One of the other frustrations I have is when you have an advisor that says, know your break even. And it's always invariably on, but we should be doing enterprise accounting that like my entire farm's going to spend $500,000 to raise corn. So I need to raise at least $500,000 and $1 to be profitable, right?
Yes.
So how do we get there? It's a tough part about how we market because we market on bushels.
But you can take that back and say, you have a pretty good idea what your bushels are going to be year in and year out. Or if you know that number, what your break even is, you can set up a marketing plan that starts getting you towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I guess, another thing as a banker, I encounter farmers that still don't know that break even.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to help out in a situation like that. And as an operator, it's hard to know where I'm going, what am I doing right if I don't know that number.
Yeah.
And it's not pinning it right to the penny, but you need to be, plus or minus $10, $15 an acre to at least have an idea of where you're going.
Yes. Oh yeah. But it all goes back to the dollars per bushel. It's just, we are in such a Mother Nature biologically dependent business that it's just frustrating at times. Like, yeah, my break even was $9.50 on beans, but I didn't get rain in August.
Yeah, those are things that are outside your control.
Yeah.
But at least having that plan to know how to make business decisions. It's the same thing with a annual cash flow projection. I understand it's a projection. It's your best guess. Mm-hmm. But you have to have that idea, that understanding of when my cash needs are the highest, what my expenses are going to be, because it really helps you with some decision-making processes, because there are going to be opportunities, whether it's to buy equipment or buy inputs, things right now in this market. But if you really don't have a good roadmap to know, well, yeah, I'd like to spend that $50,000 to trade tractors to pay that trade difference, but I don't know that coming in August I've got a huge bill. There's just too many things that can sneak up on you, and I get worried. We're in this depressed market for a little bit of a time. You've only got so much dry powder.
Yeah.
You can only go to the bank so many times and say, I need you to refinance some of my line of credit because I'm short on working capital. So it's knowing that what's out there helps you make good decisions, whether it's marketing, purchases, any of that.
So how deep do you get into helping your customers with risk management, whether it's crop insurance or hedging or hedge accounts?
We really focus probably the most on knowing your financials, knowing your expenses, profit margins, because I'll get questions all the time, like, with what's happening in the market right now, the grain market today. Should I sell? Well, I don't know. Are you profitable at 463 corn? If you don't know that answer, that's the first thing you've got to ask. And we're not going to tell you, yes, you have to sell, or no, hold tighter. We want you to know where your profit levels are. And also, there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of risk off the table, selling a little bit of crop. If I'm profitable there, like you and I were talking earlier, if that's my worst sale I make this year, I had a pretty good year. So knowing that number, but so we really help with understanding their situation, their risk, buy decisions. Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? I will sometimes play the devil's advocate or the wet blanket.
I like wet blanket. Dave Voors, the wet blanket.
My wife says the same. Why do you always do that? Well, that's kind of what I do for a living.
As a banker, yeah.
So no, we want to understand. I want to understand your operation well enough that you can call me with a question, and we can talk about the impact of doing that. And so, as far as hedging, marketing, we advise you to have a plan. If it's something you enjoy and you do well, great. If it's no different than trying to run a corporation. You've got somebody that runs your accounting department. You have somebody that runs sales. You have somebody that runs marketing, operations. There's certain things. I really haven't come across a farmer that's excellent at all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we always encourage you to find resources, figure out where your weaknesses are, utilize people.
Yeah.
For my operation, the financial part of it is something that's my strength. I don't know agronomy that well.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I hire somebody to do it. So,
that makes sense.
So that's what we try to look at it more from a holistic approach to do things to shore up your operation.
As we finish our conversation talking about the Purdue Ag Bankers Conference, where would you rate that in your career of attitudes? Are we the lowest we've ever been? Bottom third?
I would say bottom third.
Okay.
I wouldn't say lowest.
Mm-hmm.
2014, 15, 16. Those were pretty tough times. And, and when I started ag lending back in the early 2000s, we were at a time there that, really our profit was our government payment.
Mm-hmm.
Things were that tight. So, like I said, I would put it in the bottom third. But, again, balance sheets are stronger on operations. I do get a little concerned about, there's some younger farmers have never really been through something like this on a long term, and especially with these kinds of interest rates. When we hit this, in the mid-teens, interest rates were considerably lower.
And you're probably dealing with some young farmers that never had to use markers or steer without auto steer too, right?
True. They haven't sat out on a 40-20 when the snow's blowing as you're planting corn in April.
Yeah, or like, see that feed seed bag on that fence post over there? Drive towards that.
Yeah.
Or even worse, had a little iron blight there in that cornfield, didn't you?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, we're getting old, Dave.
Yes.
We're getting old. One of my favorite memory of plowing corn or cultivating corn, my grandfather called it plowing corn. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah, because when you plowed it, you got yelled at.
Yeah. Was down at Riverhaven when I worked for Ned Beyer, and it was a Minneapolis Moline 670 with a 6-row white behind it, and I decided to stop for lunch, and Whoa was oldies. That was when they were in that transition. Whoa didn't know what the heck they wanted to be, and I turned on the oldies station and ate my lunch with the sun basking down on me. I don't know why that memory stuck with me, but...
No, that was early on, probably. I would call it my first big kid job that Grandpa let me do was cultivate corn and beans. I mean, we all learned how to drive a tractor with a moldboard plow.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started, I was small enough. It was on a small open station Ford 4600. Actually, still have the tractor.
Okay.
That he was worried about me falling off the seat, so he used twine to make sure that I wouldn't fall off the seat. I had enough room to stand up, push clutch in, but he had me twined to the seat so I wouldn't fall off.
Wow, that is fun.
and I, there's times I really miss that, the smell of the dirt. And it was fun. I thought I was on top of the world.
Yeah. Well, so I'm 100% no-till. You're still seed bed for beans, still work some corn stalks. So you get to smell the dirt a little bit every year, but definitely it's a different smell than when you turn it completely over at the moldboard plow.
Yep. And it's kind of funny. Some of the, now I'm sounding old, some of the younger guys, my future son-in-law and one of my farming partners, his son, they run the disc gripper. They kind of complain about, I've been out here for hours, I'm not getting anything done, and we keep threatening to drag the plow out. And, okay, you two, you're going to have a 4-bottom and a 5-bottom plow. Go plow this 40, and you're going to love that disc gripper really quick.
You got a 416, so do that math. I'm doing 16 inches of pass.
Yeah.
And they're complaining about doing 15 with the disc gripper.
Yeah. With auto steer and stereo. And
Snapchat and Spotify. Yeah, they're spoiled.
Yes.
So one of the things that being second shift farmers have an outside job, it gives us perspective that's different. We see things differently. Is there one special thing that you have gained or unexpected that you've gained from being an insider looking inside, as it were, as a farmer being an ag lender? Is there one unexpected benefit of that?
I think it helps me manage my operation better from the financial standpoint, because I do look at numbers all day long. Sometimes I don't want to look at my own just because that's what I've done all day. It's also taught me and my partners, Mark Smith and Mark Bratmiller, that I farm with, it's taught, they're in the same boat. We all three have day jobs. It's taught us a lot about efficiency, and that's even kind of, I'll call it a game that we play in our operation is, okay, we want to get this many acres done today. How do we do it? And we're disappointed. We actually talk about, we want to get 200 acres of beans planted today. And if we only get 180, well, why?
Yeah.
So it really forces us to think every move. But it's, like I said, the best way to describe it, it's a game. It's a challenge to us. All of us have, I would say, stressful jobs, and it's a part of why we like doing this. Is it's a break. It is something completely different from what we do.
Well, you're blessed to have a logistics manager.
He is the bomb.com. But no, and even with those guys, we each bring a different skill set. Brett Miller's definitely the logistics manager, very good at figuring out how, the where, or whether it's even moving farm to farm. What steps do we move all of this so it's the fewest trips back and forth?
Yeah.
Smith is excellent at mechanics and operational things, and they kind of tease that I'm just there to write checks. That's all I'm good for.
You know that your operation is in good shape when I call you and you say you're mowing ditches. That means everybody else has a job and they're doing it.
And we are blessed to have some great people that help us out, whether it's Cal driving truck, Corbin, Mark's son, helping us, my future son-in-law, David, Brent. I mean, we've got a lot of people that enjoy coming out and help us. You've helped us in the past, and it's part of it is about making it fun. One of the things that my grandpa that got me started farming, he kind of followed the same. He carved the path, working and farming. One of the things he told me, it still sticks with me. When it quits being fun, it's time to stop.
Yeah, and
that sticks with me. Another one. There's more to farming than driving the tractor. So it, but it's. I guess it's taught me to appreciate the farming, the ag side, a whole lot more.
Yeah, I agree, because I resemble your comments. Well, we have a timely ag topic, and you didn't know about it until you showed up, but the WASDE report was dropped today, and we talked about it before that USDA decided that we had more corn than we thought we did. I think you and I knew that beforehand, but we're sitting here, corn's up 13 and a quarter, beans are up 22 cents, and 10 minutes before the close. I would think that puts your balance sheets that you'll be looking at in a little different light, depending on when they complete them, right?
Do you have it sold for that price?
That's a good point.
We tend to look at kind of what's the USDA forecast, the prices. If you don't have it marketed, we kind of use that as our guideline. So, we do take into account if you say, I've got some, July contracts at 465, we factor that in as we're building your balance sheet, or we want to make sure that you factor it in that way, but your unpriced bushels, just because it's 463 today doesn't mean, we tend to be a little more conservative. Even the same way on advance rates on grain, because we will do loans kind of like a CCC loan.
Okay.
If it's marketed, we'll advance a lot, 20% more. We'll advance 90% of contracted price.
Okay.
So Yeah, it changed the balance sheet a little bit, but really, when you're building that balance sheet, it really should be, what was it, 12/31.
But I think we don't realize with the cash flow lending that we're doing, we've kind of disconnected from the balance sheet completely differently than what we did from the 70s, where you could say, well, that 80's really worth 5,000 an acre, not 44, and you can manipulate that balance sheet, and that changed your loan criteria, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would seem like the balance sheet is more like a prideful bragging position. It's not as much of a lending tool as it used to be.
Yeah, I would probably say it's probably in our criteria, yes, it's not the number one thing that we're looking at. We're really looking at current ratio or working capital. Do you have that cushion to weather the storm? What's your debt service margin? Being able to factor in, do you cash flow? The balance sheet's important to know your overall strength and health. We want to look and make sure that debt's properly aligned. We don't, and usually where the problem gets is way too much short-term debt.
Yeah.
The 1 year and under, which would be your lines of credit, machinery debt, those kinds of things. It can get a little bit out of balance.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that the bank I work for, that's important, is to make sure that you are properly balanced.
Did my banker give you my balance sheet?
I refuse to answer that question.
Isn't there a HIPAA rule about banking?
It's banker-client privilege.
There you go. That's right. Yeah. As you look at a lot of balance sheets, what is one overlying concern that you have with full-time ag balance sheets that maybe the balance sheet you and I have don't?
Probably machinery debt.
Okay. Would we be carrying more, or would they be carrying more?
Typically, they'll be carrying more.
Okay.
And, so it kind of factors into what's your cost per acre for that debt service. But you can kind of run in sometimes to some tax issues with that balance sheet. You kind of dig a little deeper that I've got the debt out there, still got 3 years to pay on that combine, but I took bonus depreciation, so I didn't pay tax. You can get into a little bit of a cash flow issue that I'm still making the payments. I don't have the tax benefit, so I've got a huge tax bill. So we kind of look at that. That and operating debt are really the two big things that.
Okay. What about on the asset side? Is there something that, I think that we have a lot more non-ag related assets than your typical farmer would.
Oh, yes.
So that's a diversification that you and I have that a typical farmer wouldn't, correct? Yes.
Yeah, it's whether it's a safety net, whether it's in the form of retirement, savings. It gives you options to, if you've got to refi or work around things, or that time, as you're starting to look ahead and say, when you're done farming, am I going to have to roll the dice and hope that I sell my last crop, my machinery, and after I pay my taxes, do I have enough to live on?
Is that in the back of your mind as you talk with customers about balance sheets and financial health and where they're going?
Yeah. Quite a few of my customers are, 50 plus. And so some of that is, what's your retirement plan? Some of that you can look at. If there's farm real estate that's pretty well paid for, you can look and say, okay, whether it's a family member that takes over the operation and rents it from you, or it goes on the market, I can sit there and say there's enough revenue to support you for retirement.
Yep.
And I've had situations where, you're in that age group or a little older, maybe they want to buy another farm.
Yeah.
The balance sheet supports it right now in their farming. The cash flow supports it, but we will have a conversation. Okay, how much longer are you going to farm? Okay, it's not going to be paid off by then. This is what your payment is. Can you get that cash rent to make that payment?
Yeah.
And sometimes the answer is no. I mean, I've had customers, and even next generation, that are involved in an operation looking and going, okay, if I have to buy out my other family members, I can't, it doesn't generate enough. It works when mom and dad have it. It doesn't work.
That's happened in our area fairly recently with some operations where we got into that fair and equitable discussion and some people walked away.
Yeah.
Or put the farming sibling in a really bad position.
Yeah.
Where they went from farming X to half of X, and that not only does that hurt the overall income, but that hurts balance sheets and profitability and whether they can maintain or to stay on the farm, right?
Right. And that's, again, goes back to earlier when we talked about estate planning. There are mechanisms or things that can be done that, those assets get transferred, but you can put, especially if it's put into an LLC or corporation, some things that, if you want to sell this off, you can't do it for the first 5 years. You have to hold it so that farming heir has time to adjust to that transition. Yeah. And there's some things you can do to kind of help with that ability to purchase. But if it's just, mom and dad are gone and there's 600 acres here and 3 of us and 2 of us want to sell, at today's prices, it doesn't work real well.
But there's one thing that's been a consistent thread in everything that we've talked about, and it sets ag bankers apart, is that communication. Mm-hmm. And it all raised its head when it came to estate planning.
Mm-hmm. It comes about, when guys are struggling right now and operations are struggling to make payments. I always tell, if there's a problem, tell me early. I can help you. We have options. There's deferrals, there's restructure, there's things that we can do. But if you don't say anything and it's 10 days, I'm giving you a phone call because you're 10 days behind on your payment. Well, I don't have any money. I don't have many options at that point.
Well, on one hand, you want to give them the middle finger, like, screw you, dude.
For a year, this payment's coming.
On. The other hand is like, it makes it more difficult to go to the loan committee and say, hey, they're 20 days behind, I need help, as opposed to, hey, this is on the horizon, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Dealing with, those types of situations right now and internally, not only as the face out on the farm, but internally, it's a whole different conversation. That's like, I'm glad they brought that to our attention. What do you think we can do? Versus, like you said, we're 20 days, we're about to hit the 30-day mark. It's a completely different response.
I need to make a note. Call banker after this.
Yeah. So to answer your balance sheet question, I mean, every operation's different. But I would say going into this year, land values remain stable. Is there going to be a ton of scrutiny on that? No. I mean, we're still going to do the math. Machinery values, we could probably argue for the next 2 hours, but they have gone down.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I know what I paid for my combine, and I know I couldn't sell it for that 14 months later. I know.
So, yeah. So we're kind of looking at that, even, kind of doing a year-over-year comparison. If your machinery number didn't really change year-over-year, I'm probably going to look at it a little harder. Did you buy some things? Where did that come from? But, nothing will ever top. One time I had a customer that turned in the same exact balance sheet between 1 year and the other, just changed the date. Well, I'd say former customer.
But as we think about changes to accounting rules, we're all cash accounting, but if you went straight accrual, isn't your machinery cost based upon your purchase costs, and then then you have a debit against that because of depreciation? So as you and I talked about, that there's might be a push to change some stuff. It doesn't make that accounting easier.
No, and it's more, and honestly, every operation should do this. It's more to push back, and if you just say I'm managing off my tax returns, that number's kind of skewed because you've got expenses. I paid for fertilizer in 2024, but I'm not selling the crop in 2025. On my 2024 tax return, it's really 23 crop.
Yeah.
The accrual adjustment gets you to say, am I profitable this year? And that's important to know going into some of these times as you're making decisions to expand, purchase more land, rent more land, really understanding, am I making money or not?
As I approach closer to retirement, we're both closer to retirement than we are to our college. I look at non-farm financial advisors talk about 401k balances, and you look at the median and the average for our age group, and I think, holy crap, how are they going to make it? Because I think for our age group, the average 401k balance is 300,000, 350. Well, no, 400, 500 average, median's closer to like 250, 300. You got a few people that skew it.
Mm-hmm.
I think about some of our full-time farmers that have been playing the tax game, relying on bonus depreciation, not putting into Social Security, putting their money into equipment, maybe land, no stock markets. That puts you in a pretty tough position when you get to retirement, right?
Can be a huge problem. I know of farmers that got to that point when they realized, just like you said, I've been playing the tax game. I really have no Social Security income. This is my tax liability I'm going to have. It changes. The golden years aren't so golden when you first realize or start looking at that. And so, that was one of the things at the Purdue seminar, kind of circling back to that. Estate planning, retirement planning was one of the seminars I went to that was very interesting, and it really talked about you need to start planning 3 to 5 years out ahead of when you retire so that those kinds of things don't creep up.
But you're talking about an asset liquidation, transfer of property kind of story, not you should have been thinking about it 30 years ago with a little 401k or IRA investment.
Right. But the tax implication of the tax liability that can come to you because you've been playing that game so long that all of a sudden, if somebody retired at the end of 2024, well, I've been keeping doing prepays and doing everything else, and all of a sudden I've got my entire 2024 crop to sell in 25,
and nothing to go against it.
Nothing to go against it. Calculate what that if you're farming 2,000 acres, think of you're going to have a 6-figure tax bill.
Yeah.
So planning that, not including what you're going to if you sell the machinery.
Well, and I would think that the generation above us and maybe even our generation too, I mean, we're solid Gen Xers. We don't talk about that. I was fortunate that when my mother passed away, my sister and I knew, here's the will. You want to read it? I'll give it to you. It was simple. You split everything 50-50. Boom, boom, boom. We had farm assets, but there was no farming involved, so it was pretty clean. I'm sure a majority of the people you work with, the day they walk in the lawyer's office and read the will is the first time the heirs have ever seen it.
I would say the vast majority, yes. Vast majority. And that's, those kind of events can cause, the family doesn't get together for Christmas anymore. We don't speak to each other. Can create a lot of hard feelings.
Yeah.
A lot of hard feelings.
And Dad, dying at 75 or 80, thought he took care of everybody.
And that same not communicating is kind of the same thing as you're bringing the next generation onto the farm. Open the books up. Show them the books. I know of situations where they're not transparent on what's really going on, and in some cases stepping into a situation that if your significant other knew what you were stepping into, not sure.
And you turned down that job at GM to do this?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And now I can't divorce you and get anything?
Half and nothing, still nothing. But you see it in some of the farm magazines, even, frustration, some of these columns that, Dad has to have her thumb on every decision on the farm. And, if you want it to succeed, you've got to slowly let go of some of that control. And a lot of it's control. I mean, it's hard to, you could make a living as a farm psychologist with.
You'd be freaking frustrated.
Yeah.
You might be rich, but frustrated. I thought we were about done, but we just opened up another can of worms. I was at a feed mill, backed up to unload feed, and a mutual acquaintance of ours was there, our age. His dad was with him, and it was, "Hey, Georgie." That's not his name. "Hey, Georgie, did you order chicken feed?" "Yeah, Dad, I ordered chicken feed." "Hey, Georgie, you got sow feed?" "Yeah, I got sow feed." "Hey, Georgie, you do this." "Hey, Georgie, you do that." Dude was 55 years old, and I don't think he'd run a planter yet. So why is that so prevalent in ag? No, it's one thing for Toby to say that he did in his podcast, and we talked about it later. He says, I'm not comfortable doing X because you haven't taught me well enough and I'm not here enough. Okay? That's one thing. Mm-hmm. But for a 55-year-old to never have run a corn planter, and he's been on the farm his entire life, I would classify as one of those bullshit maneuvers.
Yes. Yeah. And whether it's a control issue that nobody can do it as good as I can do it, is it a trust issue? Are there other things behind that? But a lot of times it's a control issue. Nobody can do it. You know, I might as well do it myself. That's the only way it's going to get done right around here. And
wait,
no, and you've got to open up and you know, that's how you and I learned, is we were given some responsibility. We goofed some things up. As you mentioned, the corn plowing, cultivating. Yeah, I zigged when I should have zagged more than once. Did I not always keep my dead furrows straight or whatever? But I learned from it and gained confidence. And I guess I'm starting to see that with, again, with the guys that I farm with Mark bringing his son Corbin along. Corbin's learning to do different things. Sometimes it takes a different person to teach them. I can remember when Mark was trying to teach Corbin how to run the grain cart about the first time, and that ended badly with, and it finally Mark got out of the tractor and said, somebody else teach him, I can't. And it's kind of teaching your kids to drive.
Yeah.
He's learned how he can run the cart. David he started last year running disc ripper. By this year we had trained him that he can run the cart if he wants to. He can drive semi,
and he can rip without auto steer now, right?
It took a little bit of whining and crying. So I think that that trust, control, not wanting to open up, because most farmers are pretty private. And so I think that kind of spills over into that. I'm actually getting ready to, with one of my clients, they're bringing one of their sons back into the operation, and they want him to kind of learn the books. And one of the things they said is, I want you as the banker, we're all going to sit down here in the office, and I want you to teach him what you want.
I think us having off-farm jobs, I hate that off-farm, but non-farm related assets, we get to see some things. And I was just on a interviewed for a podcast this morning, and we were talking about perspective and, in that case, mental fatigue. And I ended up talking about how we bring on the younger generation, in this case, swine nutritionists. And I had called it MLM was what came to mind. You got maturity, you got leadership, and you got mentorship. And I think those go across, it can be applied to a farm too. And I think about how we've treated our children. I finally got to the point of enough maturity to know that I can't sit in the cab with Toby and tell him how to do something. No different than Mark and Corbin. Mm-hmm. So I think back to the first time he learned to cut hay. The way we cut hay here is you do 6 rounds. You go one time around next to the fence. You turn it around, and you make 5 passes clockwise. That's the way we do it. Mm-hmm. And then you go back and forth because we have a hydro swing. I put Toby in it, and when he was making his first or second pass, it was crooked as a dog's leg and didn't pick it up in time, and it wasn't. He left a little rabbit run here, and I finally got to the end and said, I pulled a mark, said, go, learn it. It's too bad you're along the road. But that took some maturity on my part to say, I can't teach him. He's got to learn on his own. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that with my younger son, the skid loader, or teaching him how to drive the semi in the field with stick shift. Like, here's how you do it. You can figure it out. And all of a sudden, here he comes going 20 across the field with a load of bales. But I think there's a maturity that we don't foster in production ag.
I would agree, and I think it's 2 parts. It's as the owner operator of the farm having the maturity to step back and say, I can't do this forever. I have someone that is capable, or I need that assistance. Because one of the things that we look at is we're evaluating businesses at the bank for loans, whether it's agribusiness, commercial, depth and breadth of management.
Okay.
Same thing applies, so you I'm kind of circling back to what have I seen working in town, to support my farming habit.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those things that, strong businesses, that's why they thrive and they're successful. Then same thing needs to be for the farming operation, is that depth and breadth of whether it's different ideas, or I'm sick, I can't plant the crop. Is there somebody that can step in and understands enough to make sure that the spring crop gets planted? Or right now we're in tax season. Does somebody understand the financials enough they can at least sit down with the accountant and say, here's the stuff?
And it's not a shoebox.
Yeah. So, it's the same way as you look at transitioning. If your kids want to farm, if my kids want to farm, have we brought them farther enough along that, number one, they know enough to say, I like it or I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to do it, can they do it? And I think as an industry, we don't do the best job of that.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And going back to, hey, Georgie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Man, I think if my dad told me, hey, Jimmy, did you do this? I'd be like, listen here, old man.
Yes. Yes.
Now I'll pull your 84-year-old ass out of that truck.
Yeah. Again, it all kind of ties back to that communication, that planning. If you want your operation to be successful and you want it to go past you, you've got to do some of those things. And as you're teaching, like, they're going to make a mistake. And, as long as they're learning in a way that, okay, you know what, we can fix that fence post. We can do that.
Yep.
We don't want them getting hurt out on the road. But they're going to make a mistake.
Well, then that goes back to the leadership. Once you have the maturity to let go of some of the reins and the leadership of, here, I'll teach you how to do this, and go from there.
And then sometimes their goof ups are good life lessons. So disc gripping, I'm pretty big on, let's pick the ripper up and set it back down as pretty close to a straight line as possible. We've had times where new people struggled with that, and you have back and forth. So I figured out the way to cure that. You make them work the ends, and after about 3 passes of hip hopping along, where if you did just, because it's always like, oh yeah, I see why you said to do that.
That's right. God, this sucks.
But I guess it's the same way. I'm quick to share things that I've goofed up and made mistakes at. If I can help prevent you from making this.
I think Mark and Mark are faster.
On sharing or making mistakes?
No.
Because I have not won the Wreck-It Ralph Award yet.
But I've heard the backed into the pickup story multiple times.
That's getting old. Come up with some new material, guys.
That means you've improved.
Yeah, but we could also talk about the that same individual that tells that story about wanting us to park over here in front of the barn so we don't hit it with the machinery. Well, he came around the corner of the barn with the corn planter and hit his own pickup truck, and he's the one that wanted everybody parking over there. So don't give me that.
And for the record, to my podcast guests, we have not broken into the bourbon bottle yet, so they could get better.
Yes.
But I think we've hit on a lot of topics that individually look important. They're obviously important. But I think the thread that goes through it is communication and maturity. Being mature enough to say, I've got a problem, and going to your banker and saying, hey, I'm not going to make that payment. What can we do? Mm-hmm. The maturity from your standpoint as a banker to understand that sometimes there's a reticence from your customers to be completely honest, even though you do have an honest, trusting relationship. How can we foster that communication? How can we break down that fear of sharing between people you trust?
I think that's a kind of a deep-seated fear. Period. That's a tough one to break through. I don't have a good answer for that. If I did, I'd be on a book tour and lecture series.
Oh, you'd be past it. You'd be having somebody else do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the snow coming today.
No, you wouldn't be. Yeah.
I think some of it can be done by example.
Mm-hmm.
Asking questions, probing, pushing. Don't just take everything's fine. No, tell me what your biggest fear is. What's your biggest challenge, and what keeps you up at night.
Mm-hmm.
To having somebody that you can talk to from a spouse, partner, friend that can sometimes say, "Hey, you kind of need to back off and let some of the stuff just play out." Okay, let them go make a mistake.
So is that challenge exacerbated in ag because we're mostly men, at least our generation?
I think so, and most farmers kind of play things close to the vest. I mean, we all talk to each other. We communicate, or if you call me, or we could go through a long list of names. Hey, I need to borrow a tractor. I'm down, whatever. They'll do that, but you don't have that deeper relationship with a lot of them. Some of it is I don't want people knowing my information. I don't want to know. I want you knowing who my landlords are, or any of those kinds of things. And I think some of it's just in agriculture you've got to be kind of an independent person in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot on your shoulders.
Yeah,
and it's not like a day job where you're just kind of going and doing the same thing, or it's a different. You're on an island. You're really on an island.
That's the two-edged sword. Like, cousin of mine responded to one of my Facebook posts about the noise of an office, and that power washing sometimes was the best place to recharge, right? I think about me for raking hay, is particularly in an open station tractor, you hear a click, 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 and it's just, I can recharge. But at the same time, you could be over at Mrs. Schaefer's at 1 o'clock in the morning planting beans, and you've been in that tractor for 20 hours, and you're like, that solitude, sometimes the demons start coming out. Like, why am I doing this? And this sucks. And
that's why I normally try to find really good music on my Spotify and start singing along.
Yeah, most of them are nursery rhymes, but that's okay.
Andrew Dice Clay nursery rhymes?
Oh.
Now I'm dating myself.
Oh, we're going there, yeah. My question doesn't have an answer, but your illustration is perfect where we let down the guard just enough. Hey, I'm screwed. I need a planter. Hey, I'm screwed. I need a tractor. Hey, I'm screwed blank. Mm-hmm. Hey, call me if you need anything. I'll call you. And I can think of 2 times that I called you and I wanted to share something and I didn't. And I need to. And it's still... It's like when we were young in Pitfall. It's jumping that next alligator.
Yeah, and I think even some of that, keeping things tighter, closer. You look at some of the things that people post on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I really don't need to know that. And so that kind of also, to me, I don't really want to let that part of me out there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, but like I said, as farmers, everybody's quick to help with that. But you're not going to go to your neighbor and say, "Hey, take a look at my cash flow projection. What do you think of this?"
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, "Ooh, I got that landlord's number on speed dial now."
You're only paying them that. So yeah, I think that's just a little bit of it.
Dadgummit, we do get philosophical at times, even though we're just dumb Purdue grads.
Yeah.
All right. So at the end of every one of my podcasts, I ask the same 5 questions to everybody. And there's one that I've seen some commonality to, and I'm thinking that I might publish a post on, hey, here's what's happened the last 6 months with this question. So I'm interested to hear your response to these questions. And they are not, what is your cash flow? So you can't have that easy answer. It is, what is your cash rent, though?
None of your business.
That answer is yes. What is one lesson ag has taught you that you carry with you every day?
That there are going to be good times, bad times, and you learn to push through or deal with the bad times, whether it's poor prices, bad weather. But you also learn to enjoy the good moments, whether it's, out there on a nice spring day planting corn, or, one of my favorite things in the fall, being in the combine and listening to a football game on the radio. I don't care who's playing, but just going back and forth and harvesting and learning to slow down and embrace and enjoy those moments.
If you could spend an afternoon with any agricultural figure from history, who would it be and why? And you can't say Dr. Cadillac.
All right. Earl Butts probably wouldn't be a good answer either. That's an inside joke that I'll have to explain off the air. What's a tough one? I would either say going all the way back to John Deere and perfecting the moldboard plow, or Cyrus McCormick and harvesting. And those are a couple of things that really kind of revolutionized or started ag down a path to be able to produce more. Going that far back, and
those are two good ones. The thing that sets them apart, and you can put in Oliver too, is they weren't making anything better. They were making something new. I mean, granted, maybe the plow was better than the piece of wood they were dragging through the field, but it's not like John Deere coming up with the brand new rotor design. They're just making something better. That was truly revolutionary.
Yes.
The Eli Whitney and the cotton gin.
Yes.
That was brand new.
Yeah. It's something that really transformed the industry.
Yeah. And think about, we still know who Cyrus McCormick is and John Deere 150, 60, 75 years later, whatever the number is. Yeah. What is one quirky or little-known fact about ag you wish more people knew?
I would say, and this kind of stems back from a conversation I had with some non-ag people before Christmas, farmers, whether it's grain farmers, livestock farmers, truly do care about the environment, the livestock, that it's very important to them that they maintain the land, that their animals are treated well and fair. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about that I wish more people knew, that the devotion that farmers have.
That's a really good one. What's your favorite ag tool, product, or innovation?
I would say that technology, not necessarily just the auto steer, but some, I guess, a general, whether it's things we can do with spreadsheets and data, to yield monitors, soils, putting all that together to make farm management a whole lot more effective and efficient.
This is my grandfather's. I'm holding up a little Federal. This one's empty, but that was what he did. And I paid this for corn, and at the end of the year, here it was. And we've got QuickBook files that are how many megabytes big, and it has how much data, and we can print this report. Yes,
Yeah, so I still have, from when I first started farming, it's basically an accounting notebook with all the columns and the different colors of green and all of that. That's how you took care of everything. Or, and I can remember Grandpa sitting there in, December and January, spending hours at the desk, handwriting and doing all this. And with what I can do now so quickly.
Yeah.
That's, to me, that's amazing. I think it makes you more effective managing. It's definitely much quicker.
Oh, yes. Definitely quicker. What is one small act or change you think could make the biggest difference in ag's future?
I guess I'll tie it back to my earlier answer, an appreciation of what the ag industry is doing for either the country or the world. Going back to some of the non-farm conversations I have with people about, you're putting all these poisons and fertilizers and things. Why aren't you doing? I was like, why don't you do things organically? Was the question I was asked, and went through a pretty lengthy explanation of, okay, when you do it organically, this is the yields that we're going to have, and so we can't feed the world. There's certain things we have to do to meet the demand that's out there. It goes back to, farmers are good stewards of what they're doing. We've got to do more with less, and understanding that we are doing the best that we can. If we, abusive to our animals, abusive to our ground, any of those types of things, we're hurting our own long-term success. So it's very important. So an understanding that we are focused on that.
Well, Dave, you have given us a lot of nuggets to think about. I really appreciate the perspective you brought from an ag banker standpoint, and I like the perspective you gave us as a second shift farmer and how you can see things on both sides of the velvet curtain at the Emerald City. There's some people that you shall not pass. So thank you for coming and spending time in my Terra level executive suite, since the patio is a little chilly right now.
Yeah, I'm not interested in any patio ponderings.
No, we're not going to we'll only think with ponders. Why the hell are we out here?
Yeah.
So thank you for spending time with us. And to my audience, this is what you can expect, some deep dives into some timely ag topics. And as you heard today, we're going to dig down deeper with more guests to get to the expected and the obscure in how ag affected their growth. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Patio Pondering. We hope you enjoyed exploring both the expected and obscure corners of agriculture with us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. Connect with us anytime at jim@patiopondering.com. Until next time, keep growing, exploring, and cultivating.